Good day. Welcome to the devotional for today. Hope you're having a good day. It's a nice sunny day here in Nova Scotia, and we had a couple of days of rain, so it's nice to see the sun again. But anyway, I hope you're having a good day wherever you are. We're in Proverbs chapter 5, verse 21 today. We've been working through this chapter. A couple of things I want to do just to set things up today. One is, just for those of you that are wondering, the translation of the Bible that I'm using for these teachings is the New American Standard Bible, the 1995 revision. That's my personal favorite. I like it. And so that's the one I've been using. This was originally written in Hebrew, and so we, of course, need an English translation unless we all speak Hebrew. And so that's the translation I use. So for those that might have been wondering. We've been working our way through the book of Proverbs, looking at God's wisdom for life and the moral code of God and just the things that are there. And the fifth chapter of Proverbs, as we've been working through it, focuses a lot on the idea of marriage. It's written to a young man saying to him that he should be faithful to his wife and not go to an adulterous situation. Not to go with an adulterous woman and or have an affair or to break your marriage vows, and so your marriage covenant, I should say. So that's kind of what it's been focusing on. I've often made the statement through this chapter of it's transferable, and the idea of that is even though it's written to a young man with regard to his wife, a young woman with regard to her husband would make sense, of course, but also just in other areas of life where we have a covenant and we have a path that we should do when there's an obligation on us to follow a certain course. The ideas would transfer to some degree, at least, into those other areas. As we get to these last few verses in particular, that's definitely the case. These last few verses kind of sum up the chapter. It was saying, here's what you should do. Don't do the opposite because you'll end up with this regrets. And then it talks about here's some good motives, and then here's the right place for your sexual energy. And it gets these last three verses, and it's saying, and above and on top of all of that, God's watching. And so that's kind of what we're getting into in these last three verses. So let's read verse 21, and we'll just deal with this one verse today. But it says, so in light of everything that we've said, it says, "For the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths." So the idea here, right? God is watching, and that's simply what it is. The ways of the man are before the eyes of the Lord. He is watching what you do in life, the way you live your life, and he watches all your paths. So that, once again, the way you live your life, not just each individual event, but what is it that you're doing? What is the nature of the decisions you make? What kind of person are you? And God is watching this, and he's watching everything. This isn't just simply referring to marriage. This is everything. God watches everything you do. God is in heaven. He's watching all your paths, and the implication here is he's judging it. Now, we got to understand that properly. So I want to talk about this. But God is understood. One of the things about God is he's understood to be the judge of all the earth, as it says in the book of Genesis. He's the judge of all the earth, or as it says later in the New Testament. And that God's place in creation as the creator is to be the one who judges it. And so this is the idea. And so we realize this about God. It's something he does. And no human being is exempt from this. And no part of human experience is exempt from this either. God watches all the ways of man, all your paths. He watches everything you're doing, whether it be with your marriage or your commitments to your children or your commitments to your workplace or your commitments to God himself or whatever it is. When you live your life and the obligations that are on us to be good and moral people, God watches our lives and he judges. It doesn't matter what our culture is. It doesn't matter whether our culture changes its mind on something or we have new sensibilities on something or we think this or we think that. It doesn't matter. We are not the judge. History isn't the judge. God is the judge, and he looks at everything humans do and he judges it. Now, eventually we all have to give an account to God, and it doesn't matter what the laws of any particular time or place are, whether it be a king in the Middle Ages or some sort of a tribal leader from the ancient world, or whether it be a president in our current time. It doesn't matter what laws get made by humans. What you have to answer to those as a citizen of whatever country you're in, but the laws of God apply to all humans everywhere. God's view and watching over humanity applies to every human that will ever live, no matter where or when they live. He watches and he judges. And it doesn't matter if you give yourself permission. You say, well, I think this or I think that. Who cares what you think? It may help you along in life to have an opinion on things, but in the end, it's God's opinion that rules the day. And so it doesn't matter what you think. And that's a really potent truth. And it's something you got to kind of come to terms with in your life. A lot of people try and deny this, and they try and act as if God has no place to watch or judge anything, or you try and decide that you're an atheist and you don't believe God's there. It doesn't matter. He's still there. He'll still judge. And that, just dealing with that, we often want to try and convince ourselves that God isn't either we try to convince ourselves he isn't there, or some variation of God doesn't judge. Oh, God accepts everything, or God doesn't really care, or God, and we have all these ideas that we come up with about how maybe God isn't actually. I don't owe God an explanation for anything. That's what we want to believe, because it's, well, a lot more comfortable to go through life thinking that you're your own God. But God still judges, and He is the one that's supposed to judge, and He watches all of our paths and everything. So this chapter just making that point. It's saying, with regard to your marriage, God's the judge of your marriage. Now, when we talk about judge, I think it's important to say this because of some of the ways we think in our times. The word judge does not mean condemn. It doesn't mean God condemns, although God could condemn, uh, but it means that He makes the decision. Right? When we use the word judge, we mean He makes a decision. It's not that God comes from a position of condemnation. Rather, He comes from a position of, I will decide, is this worthy of condemnation, or is this worthy of praise and reward, and so vindication or something of that. So it's a judgment. It's not judgmental. It's judgment. God looks at everything we do in our life, and He judges: is what you're doing righteous, thus worthy of reward, or is what you're doing unrighteous, thus worthy of discipline? And so that's where the condemnation would come. And so condemnation is part of it. But when we say God judges, we mean He looks at and assesses and decides which thing it will be, whether it be judgment in the sense of condemnation or judgment in the sense of affirmation and saying, good job, well done. The thing is, He's the judge, and He's the one that sits on that chair of discernment, of decision making. And He is, being God, He is completely fair in this. No human being gets special treatment. Not a single one of us can ever look and say, I'm going to stand before God, and because it's me and I'm His favorite or something. No, no, all humans will be treated the same. He is completely fair and does not show partiality. It's a theme that runs through the whole Bible. Very clear. God is not a God of partiality, and He doesn't give favor to one human over another. We all have to stand before Him and give account. And He's just. Not only is He fair, He's just in that He doesn't ever choose unjustly. He doesn't decide to bend the law or to just forgo the law. The Bible says He will leave no one unpunished, right? Like He's not gonna let that go by. I mean, there's the whole thing about Jesus, and that's a really amazing truth that Jesus can take our punishment for us. But that's another video for another time. For the purposes of today's video, just understand God's just. He never makes a decision either for reward or for condemnation. He never makes a decision that's unjust because He's perfectly good. He is perfectly good. Here on earth, we have no guarantee that any judge we ever sit in front of is a good judge. We can hope that He's a good judge, but we don't know it. But with God, we know it. He's a good judge. He never does anything unjust. And He's fair and He's just. And He's not corruptible. And this is important. He's not corruptible. You can't trick Him. You can't sway Him. You can't bribe Him. You're not going to get a free pass with God just because you found some clever loophole in the law. It doesn't work that way. God is absolutely incorruptible. And so His goodness and His ability to see what the right judgment should be is absolute. And so with all of that in mind, this verse is telling you as a young man, it's speaking in that particular perspective, right? As a young man, do not betray the covenant with your wife, because that part of your life, your marriage, is one of the things that's under the watch of God. One of the biggest lies of our day and age is that marriage is only between the two people that are involved, and they forget that it's before God. And so God judges. He looks at your marriage. It's not off limits to him. He looks at your marriage. Are you keeping your vows? Are you, even more than that, are you honoring the covenant that you entered with your wife, if it's in this particular gender sense? Young man, are you honoring the covenant with your wife? And God will judge whether you do or don't, and he will deal accordingly. And that's what this verse is reminding us of. So if all the other motivation doesn't work, if you're not motivated by not wanting to have regret, if you're not motivated by wanting to have a good sense of self-esteem by doing what's right, or by having intimacy in the right way, or if you're not motivated by all these other things we've been talking about, then at the very least be motivated by the fact that God's watching, and your marriage is before him as well. If you're a Christian watching this video and you want to go a little deeper with that, read Malachi chapter 2, verse 13 to 17, and it'll give you a little more glimpse into this. For now, may God bless our marriages. May we do what is honorable in the eyes of the Lord. Have a great day, Lord willing. We'll be back tomorrow with verse 22. Take care.